So, chances are if you saw my last review, you might have gotten the idea that I hate sequels, or think that original ideas are better by default or something. But rest assured, Animaniacs, that bit was done mostly in jest. We all know that there's a lot of really great sequels, and a lot of really terrible original ideas. And originality is really a relative term used to describe a story's inspiration rather than its quality. But let's also be honest, part of where the stigma still prevails is that most of the time when a studio decides to greenlight a sequel, it's not because they think it has the great capacity for an amazing story, it's because money. And in a hurry to get said money, most sequel scripts are rushed when they're not just straight up lazy. Which brings us to Illumination Entertainment, now on their third installment of their premier massive hit and merchandising oil strike, now consisting of 3 out of their 4 animated films. Now on the one hand, Minions is a blatant cash-in and everybody knows that. And the advertising and the merch production was about as pervasive as we've ever seen it get. I mean, Amazon started shipping Minion boxes, just regular boxes, with Minions on them. But you know what? I get it. Of course, the only other studio that has a theme park would be so excited about being able to exploit their own property for a change, and ideally, their ocean of money should secure the studio enough to allow them to take some risks in the future. They already have a promising original trailer out, going to be followed by the next bastardization of Dr. Seuss. Besides, even Pixar started making sequels on their 3rd picture, and Shrek 2 wasn't that far behind the original either. Still, those companies at least had a pretty good handful of originals before they started spinning their wheels on single franchises. But let's not dwell on this and get to the freaking point already. For the bulk of it, I really like the prior Despicable Me movies. Not that they're timeless classics or even personal favorites, but they're cute, fun comedies with an interesting, exaggerated design aesthetic parodying the life of supervillains. But what mostly everyone has particularly enjoyed enthusiastically are the Minions, Gru's Oompa Loompa-ish supposedly limitless workforce that all skin gibberish as the bulk of the film's comedy. So much so that they officially have their own movie. A movie that if you've seen the latest trailer of, you've basically nearly seen all of already. Yes, as predicted, Minions has joined the Trailers Ruin Everything Club, but I guess that's only to the point on how many people really expected to go to a Minions movie to be surprised. I mean, the entire point of a Minions movie is for people to watch the things that they already like seeing the Minions do, like speaking in gibberish, singing in gibberish, hitting each other, and a surprising amount of semi-sexual humor, apparently. But again, I get it. At least as a comedic device, the Minions are sort of brilliant. Yeah, they look and talk funny, but other than that, they still operate and behave like regular people, making them funny, but also relatable. Also adorable. It is a little curious how this movie shows the Minions' main characteristic outside of enthusiastic cheerfulness is, well, incompetent. And yet they seem very capable when they're with Gru, but I guess they just needed the right fit. But I personally do have a limit of how much I can take the Minions. That holiday ad did start to drive me up the wall after a while. Still, for the bulk of it, Minions is fine. The first half of the Minions movie holds up pretty well in content and in pacing, but because of the trailer, you've already seen most of the best parts of that. Heck, the delivery of the Minions' backstory is probably better paced in the trailer than the movie, but that's probably just because you've seen the trailer for Minions about 100 times by now and are just used to it that way. I also don't think I've seen such an onslaught of blatant death in a family movie before. But then the second half starts to divulge in a little more over-the-top silliness than we've come to expect, to the point where the believability starts to waver a bit. And believe me, I understand. Part of Despicable's charm was its excessively fast-paced, over-the-top silliness. That was still able to pull back to quieter, sweeter moments. And Minions doesn't quite have that same balance. Having nothing to do that there's no good guy, relatable human characters, because the Minions themselves are indeed capable of quiet, introspective moments. But in the second act, they just kept amping up the crazy to the point where we're starting to break my silliness limits. But overall, I do still say it works, and there are several things to genuinely like about it. The animation, absolutely. In their speed and their crazy character design, which by the way has improved a lot since the first movie. Case in point, oh thank deities, a well-designed villain! I knew you could do it, Illumination! And I really love Scarlet Overkill as a character. Sandra Bullock gives a great performance, but as a villain, it's a little disappointing that aside from some kung fu, her powers are basically to get other people to do her work. But hey, management is a totally legit skill. And I actually love that the evil objective is to become a princess. There's also her husband that's pretty funny in his own right, but still, no human characters really seem to mesh comfortably with the minions the way Gru did, and which is a significant hole in the film. But the movie also doesn't have the girls, so points there. But above all, I'm impressed at the character they were able to give the minions. In the Despicable movies, while not perfectly identical and with individual names, most of the times the minions were pretty interchangeable. In this movie, the story focuses on 3 specific minions on a journey to find the most despicable villain to be their master, Kevin, Stuart, and Bob. And the film manages to give each of them a very prominent, recognizable personality that makes them very relatable, specifically the child, the adult, and the adolescent. And pretty much predictably, after the over-narrated prologue, the scene that I enjoyed the most was the time they spent meandering around New York without any narration or comprehensible dialogue, so everything was delivered visually. And their characters really shined in this segment. I guess it was too much to hope that it would be that way throughout the entire movie, but I guess we'll see how that technique turns out in the Shaun the Sheep movie. But I did also enjoy when they got to Villain Con, a sequence that I actually think could have been a lot longer and could have had a lot more fun with. Same thing with you, Ted 2. You could have gone so much further making fun of conventions. So Minions is no Inside Out, by a long shot, but it's cute, exaggerated, and silly, and really, do we want a Minions movie to be any other way? Well, the second half could have been more grounded, and oddly, we could have used more Minions doing their own thing rather than interacting with humans, and also probably better in smaller increments, you know, like a series of shorts. It neither has moments of extraordinary revelations, but nor moments of extreme annoyance, and to gauge your silliness tolerance, this is a bit more silly than the Penguins movie. But the last 2 minutes are arguably worth the entire admission price alone, and I'm not gonna say anything else about it. So Animaniacs, what did you think of Minions? Comment, like, subscribe, etc., and you stay incredibly shiny, Animaniacs.
It had to be. The only one for me is you, and you for me, so happy together.